Hello, I didn't see you there. My name is Rachel G&S Middle, and Gilbert and Sullivan is my middle name. You see, because even though it's spelled Gianesse, that is also a way that people shorten Gilbert and Sullivan. They say G&S. And I'm here on behalf of Forbear Theatre to explore the magic of the Gilbert and Sullivan operas. End of sentence. I'm also using these videos as an opportunity to practice my makeup skills. I like seeing what kind of looks I can put together. This is my very second time covering up my eyebrows. Look how much better it is than the first time I did it. In short, I'm just very talented. So you should all subscribe to this channel and maybe even support Forbear Theatre. You can even go over to my personal Instagram where I do a lot of singing myself. I make a lot of silly videos. I also post quite a bit of amusing cat content. This is far too hot to drink. I don't know why I'm lifting the cup now. Anyway, what we are here today for is to discuss which is better, traditional productions or non-traditional productions. Now, before we even get into that, we have to ask ourselves, what is a traditional G&S production? Now, I'm going to be a little bit cheeky here, and I'm actually going to properly answer this question later in the video, but to get us started, I want to take you through what is usually understood commonly to be a traditional G&S production, and that is one that is closest as possible to what we assume Gilbert and Sullivan intended. So that, to me, is what, if you ask most people, that would be probably along the lines of the answer they would give you. There are issues to this answer, which I'm going to get into later, but for this video to be as narratively dramatic as possible, I need to get into the pros and cons now. Let me talk about why I love a good old traditional Gilbert and Sullivan opera. For a start, the G&S operas are for the most part pretty timeless already. Even for something like The Yeoman of the Guard, which is pretty trapped within a rough time frame. The story itself is pretty timeless, and if you think about the number of comic operas that were being released at the time that Gilbert and Sullivan were around, and how many of those have just kind of died a death and not really been perpetuated culturally, Gilbert and Sullivan operas have stood the test of time for a reason. So there is this very valid notion of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think that is a really valid viewpoint to have. And there's also something really fun about the idea of imagining we're sitting down in the theatre and seeing exactly what those Victorian audiences would have saw. I know that William Remmers and I have discussed quite a lot how much we'd have been completely blown away by being in that first night for Utopia Limited. And it's a common source of discussion amongst our friends and Savoy Net and forums like that. If you could choose any G&S opera to see the first night of, which one would it be? So these topics are prevalent for a reason, and there is still definitely a place for people just to do a really beautifully staged, gorgeously aesthetic traditional production, apart from the Mikado and Utopia Limited with its problematic elements. That's a whole other topic for another day. There's also the matter of, if you do have a brilliant concept production, you just better be damn sure that you've thought it through all the way. You would think that the E&O, and I know that there's been a lot of business recently with the E&O having its funding stripped away, but I believe that this production of The Yeoman of the Guard was created and produced before that happened, but please correct me if I'm wrong. I think that the funding issue started once The Yeoman of the Guard was underway. But what was frustrating about that to me wasn't the fact that it was moved in time, it was the fact that it had been done inconsistently. So one of my favourite bits in the whole show, just for wow, how lazy, was when Elsie says to Fairfax/Leonard something along the lines of, but I'm remembering the keywords correctly, "Master Leonard, you are joking." And then he replied to her, "May I shrivel into raisins if I jest?" Are you not even going to make sure that you've consistently changed words from line to line? Was this just the actors messing up? Maybe literally just that one night I saw somebody slipped up. And in that case, that's fine. Like, people always have the right and the privilege to mess up on stage. But if that was an oversight on the part of whoever rewrote the script, like, what on earth are you doing? And the fact that they rewrote bits of business to go into the dialogue, but they didn't carry that over into the music as well. You just think to yourself, why did you bother? Why didn't you just do a really beautiful traditional production of Yeoman of the Guard? You could have had all the life, you could have had all the wonderful staging that you did, but just set it traditionally. They had this amazing tap dance in Hark What Was That, Sir? And the movement of that was so amazing that it actually inspired me to love that song way more than I had previously. But there's no reason why they couldn't have had Tudor people tap dancing. I mean, people didn't habitually burst the song either in the 1870s. I actually love just sticking random modern dance moves into traditionally costume productions. I get a real kick out of that. But generally, I think that Gilbert and Sullivan wrote what they wrote for a reason. And to think that we know better than Gilbert and Sullivan, for the most part, I'm going to get into this in a moment, is just a bit egotistical. I heard of another production where they changed the words of an opera so much that it just became like completely nonsensical. And while I am one of the most liberal people you'll ever meet, and I'm extremely conscious of my language and modern values, I do sometimes think that people have gone too far removing certain words. I think that we do have to develop a little bit of a thick skin about how differently women were treated in Victorian times. There are ways in which we can empower women within the dialogue of Gilbert and Sullivan without changing the plot or changing the words. There are ways that we can say the words which do offer women more agency. I've done this a lot with my production of Yeoman of the Guard, where if it's simply changing the characterization of Phoebe and Wilfred helps that relationship not be problematic. Like, you don't have to totally rewrite the script in order for it to fit modern values. Unless you're doing a production of Princess Ida, then it's pretty much impossible. As I say, I'm speaking generally. There are individual problems with individual operas that I think are separate topics in themselves. But that is why I love a good old rollicking traditional production. It's an interesting point. In 2021, the International Gilbert and Sullivan Festival showcased 6 professional productions. I, Rachel GNS Middle, directed 3 out of those 6 productions. And I would say that my 3 productions were by far the most traditional of all of those productions. And it's interesting because I think people tend to sometimes think of Forbear Theatre as, oh, we're really out there and really edgy, but actually I love tradition, and I love doing like a really gorgeous Yeoman of the Guard, a really pristine Pirates. What was the other one I did? HMS Pinafore. Like, that was really lovely traditional costumes. Sometimes you just have to do the piece and not really try and add anything crazy to it, and you find that what Gilbert and Sullivan wrote is actually, controversially, enough. However, these are some reasons why non-traditional productions of Gilbert and Sullivan, alongside traditional productions, are a good thing. For a start, art is meant to evolve. Somebody said in a Facebook comment, or it's possibly on SavoyNet, forgive me, I forgot, in response to talking about action in the overture, that if Gilbert had just taken an immortality potion and were still alive today, I bet he would have totally revised his staging. He may even have rewritten some of the operas. And this is because, generally, the longer people are alive, the better ideas they have. Or at least that's how it should be. I directed The Yeoman of the Guard 3 years ago, and I'm now directing it again. And I am doing a 95% different production. I've carried over a few little things, but honestly, it's pretty much an entirely new show. And that's not because I think that what I did was awful back then. It's not because I think, oh, it has to be different. Just generally, I have grown up in those 3 years a bit more, and I have better and more developed ideas. And I think that if Gilbert was still alive today, he probably would have thought a similar thing. I very much doubt that if Gilbert was directing, like, can you imagine, this is like a dream, if Gilbert was made immortal, and then every year from then until now, he just put on like all of his operas in sequence, so like Trial by Jury 1 year, Sorcerer, HMS Pinafore, etc. And every time he did it, he just kept reviving it, kept making it different. I'm not saying he would change a lot of the words or even any of the words, but don't try to tell me he would have tried to just do the same production over and over again. Like, we cannot possibly know either way, but I really don't think he would have done that. I think that Gilbert was an artist and he would have wanted to try out new things. He edited his own productions, like he changed The Sorcerer for the revival, I believe. He cut a lot of material after First Nights. There is no evidence that Gilbert wouldn't have wanted his pieces to develop. Also, along similar lines, theatre is not the same as a movie or a film. You don't buy a ticket just to see the same show you've seen before. You want to see a different show, surely. Otherwise, I don't really understand why you're going to the theatre. And I would actually rather see a production that was absolutely awful, where they tried something really different, than to see just the same production I've seen a million times before. I want to see people try things. And yes, sometimes it's going to fail. And if those are the pieces that you remember and think, I don't like non-traditional productions because I once saw this awful production of Utopia Limited that did this, that's not a very good way to look at it. We have to commend people for trying. I've also known several directors over the course of my life, some of whom I love very much, but maybe I wouldn't agree with their practices, who, when they have been directing me, they are holding a notebook, and in that notebook, and I have asked them so I know this, in that notebook is just exactly what their blocking for patience is. I'm just pulling an opera at random. And they are just trying to replicate a previous production that they've done. Like, why are you doing that? It's just like a waste of energy. It's a waste of art. I can definitely see that if maybe you put on like a really low budget experiment of something, and then later on you've got the budget to make it really good, that is maybe a good excuse as to why you would want to somewhat regurgitate a production, but it would be elevating it. What I'm asking is, why would you want to just do a production which is exactly the same? Like, what are you gaining from that as an artist? What are the performers there for? Are they just your tools? Because for me, as a director, the performers are very much part of my creation. I had a certain vision for Yeoman when I made my casting call and cast the actors, but being in the room with the actors, it makes you think different things. I was about to block Hereupon We're Both Agreed the other week, but then I heard them sing it, and I heard the incredible musical director played it just in a way I'd not really heard before, and I'm like, this is kind of Straussian, this is glorious. We should really be making a meal out of this. Like, this is something special. And I was like, you know what? I have blocked this number, but it's in the trash. Like, I am forgetting about all my blocking. I'm going to make new blocking for this because you guys deserve it. And like, that should be the way that people work. Maybe not everyone has the luxury of doing that. I've got the luxury of time. If you don't have the luxury of time, I appreciate that might not be an option, but ideally it is. Also, and more importantly, people insisting on smaller companies or university companies putting on traditional productions. Do you understand how much it is to hire traditional costumes? Like, how much it is to hire a full set of yeoman costumes, a full set of dragoon costumes? This is alienating to younger companies, to university companies, because people can't afford that necessarily. So in a large part, that is why they are updating these pieces, because they can't afford the costumes. And that, to me, is actually 100% a perfectly good reason for updating costumes and updating the setting. I myself am now going to be setting the Yeoman of the Guard in 1648. And you know why that is? It's because I like the hairstyles. I think the ladies' hairstyles in the mid-17th century look really cool. And that is a good enough reason to update Yeoman of the Guard. I don't have to change a single word, but it just means that people will look at the costumes and go, oh, that's nice. Just because they may not have seen Yeoman of the Guard in those exact costumes before. But why not? We can do what we want. And it doesn't change the story, it's still the same story. But this way they get to do that story and have good hair at the same time. And going back to my previous point about some of the operas with more problematic elements, Utopia Limited, its problematicness regarding race aside, is just not really as well written as the other operas. It very much needs an edit. And that is what my excellent friends Natan and Will did when they put on Utopia Opera's production of Utopia Limited. I could maybe look at areas that I think are in need of further improvement, but I think that what Natan has done is excellent. If you're interested in that, go check out my Utopia Limited dialogue video. I'll put that in the comments below. But it's just an example of how people who study Gilbert very fastidiously are able to create dialogue that is so remarkably like Gilbert's dialogue that you couldn't tell the difference. And the idea that Gilbert is this deity, this saint, whose words we must preserve at all costs, is just dehumanizing him. Gilbert was a human. He was capable of making errors. He made an error at the end of Grand Duke when Ernest said, well, I'll come alive in a few minutes, but no, Ernest was already alive. Like, Gilbert has made errors. He's confused about how the potion works and the sorcerer. This is fine. It doesn't mean he's bad. It's just people are imperfect. And if you want to go tell me that, oh, it's a comic opera, it's not meant to make sense, I would like you to switch this video off, unsubscribe from my channel, remove me as a friend from Facebook, and just become invisible to me, because it is just such a lazy, worthless opinion to be having. Like, if that's what you think, why are you watching this video? Just go away and enjoy watching the same production of GNS over and over again. Like, I am not for you, so just leave me alone. People will say things like, oh, you wouldn't update Shakespeare. I'm like, are you kidding? People update Shakespeare all the time. Shakespeare updated Shakespeare. There are 3 different versions of Hamlet. When I was musical directing a production of Hamlet a few years ago, we had 3 separate scripts and we were like going between them, like thinking, right, what shall we do? Like, which bits of each shall we include? There are whole speeches that are in some versions and not others. Or there are 2 speeches that say the same thing narratively, but in a different way, because Shakespeare rewrote it. And it's madness to think that Gilbert's words should be so exactly set in stone. Having said that, if a director wants you to learn the lines exactly how they are, then that is also 100% valid to do. And I always insist upon that in the rehearsal room. I will actually call people out for just saying like an extra and or a the. Bless them, they did this very well. My 2 double-casted Sergeant Merrills both said that really complicated, and that's the, and that horrible speech. They need to say that exactly as it's written, because it's actually one of the best things Gilbert ever wrote. My point is that Gilbert's works are not sacred. If Shakespeare's works are not sacred, then neither are Gilbert's, I'm afraid. So this video is actually not about traditional versus non-traditional GNS productions. Haha, I fooled you. It's not about that at all. This video is actually about the fact that the same people who tend to say, I only want to see traditional productions, don't necessarily know what a traditional production is. They don't even have a clear idea in their own minds what tradition means. So if we are taking the concept of a traditional production as read, that would be a production that is as close to as Gilbert would have intended as possible. Now, Gilbert's dead. He's been dead for quite a long time. We cannot possibly know the exact details of what he wanted. From the little that we do know, he did direct actors on stage, so he had opinions as a director. It does seem like his direction was rather static. It seems that a lot of the actors seem to create their own moves. because they were stars in their own right. I'm thinking of Grothsmith. And obviously, as we've seen in the amazing film Topsy Turvy, he actually invited some Japanese ladies to come in and teach his three little maids how to walk, which shows to me that Gilbert was interested in truth and authenticity. Gilbert also cast actors. He did not cast grand opera singers. Gilbert himself did not consider his pieces to be grand opera. Yet, almost universally today, you see professional companies hiring opera singers with really big, dramatic voices that aren't always suitable to the material. And it's interesting how people now consider that to be traditional when we know for a fact that isn't what Gilbert wanted. You could argue that just methods of singing have changed over time, but do we know that Gilbert would have wanted that? We don't know. We don't know that Gilbert would have preferred his pieces sung in that way. And I think the idea that, oh, well, opera singers would just be better at singing the material is just short-sighted. Because I think that may be true for some pieces. For example, I couldn't imagine there being a very MT Princess Ida. Lady Psyche, on the other hand, I think there are many ways of singing that role that don't have to be operatic. Imagine a proper MT, like belted Dear Friends Take Pity on My Lot from Constance. That would kick ass. When I did my musical theatre masters, we had a Gilbert and Sullivan week where 10 of us were asked to bring in a Gilbert and Sullivan tune. And of course, none of them really knew any Gilbert and Sullivan. So I, kind of looking at the kind of performer they were, I actually just assigned everyone. I think not all of them went with my choice, which is of course perfectly okay. But I think about 7 out of 10 people went with my choice. And it was so amazing seeing these songs sung by people who understand acting through song and understand how to use the text. I'm not saying that opera singers can't do that. That's not maybe their first thought when they pick up a Gilbert and Sullivan aria. Whereas giving it to actors just brings a fresh dimension to it. I'm not saying it's better, I'm just saying it's different and it's kind of cool. Secondly, there's been so much telephone gaming year to year that I don't think that people really know what traditional business is. I've certainly seen like a lot of people do certain actions in Never Mind the Why and Wherefore where Sir Joseph Porter, rather than saying in A Law 2 Rules of Water, would just go, water, because he's dehydrated because of all the dancing. And that's cool. That's really funny. And the idea behind that is that we're existing in a kind of meta-universe where these people really are just being forced to sing over and over again. And that is funny. But the trouble is, people have lost sight of why business exists and are just repeating business for the sake of business without really finding the truth behind it. And I know that sounds like flowery nonsense, but it's very important to me as an audience member and a director that when you are doing a piece of business, there is actually a dramatic reason behind it. Of course, in opera, we are existing in a heightened world, and so we would perform actions that maybe we wouldn't perform in real life. But it needs to be based on some kind of authenticity. Otherwise, I don't really see the point. I don't really know where it's coming from. A lot of traditional Gilbert and Sullivan has, through my experience, just been reduced to what the doily cart happened to do in this one particular production in 1976. And it's not actually what Gilbert wanted. It's a new idea. It's something that somebody came up with once who never knew Gilbert because Gilbert was already dead when this person was born. So it's just useless for us to try and assert that we know what Gilbert would have wanted just based on what the doily cart were doing in the 70s and 80s. And the thing is, I love the doily cart. And I'm very sad that came to an end. But if you watch that morning British television segment where it's got the members of the doily cart on when the company's about to be closed, you can see why that company was closed. That was like the stalest rendition of the Act 2 finale of HMS Pinafore ever. And the thing is, I'm not faulting individual performers. I think that everyone in that set was extremely talented, but there was just no joy in it. There was no life in it. They obviously needed some new blood to kind of inject the company with freshness and joy, but they were so stale in their ideas that the company failed. And it's no coincidence that at about the same time that Broadway Pirates came out, which introduced a whole generation of people to Gilbert and Sullivan. And some people, even now, like, oh, what an awful production. Well, that's probably a great deal of the reason why a lot of people have heard of Gilbert and Sullivan. So we have to be grateful for it in that respect. A lot of people who say they care about tradition will speak words instead of singing them, or they'll rush the text, or they'll say it in an insincere, inauthentic way. And that, I feel, is just so against what Gilbert would have wanted. As far as we know, what Gilbert would have... Oh my God, that's really bad. Look at that. Never even noticed that. Oh, it's on the other side as well. Huh. I need to get better at doing my makeup. What I think is really important, and this is something that most productions I see don't seem to care about. When I look at other productions, like amateur productions, professional productions, there are always things to love about them. And this is not to say that I don't really enjoy going to the theatre and watching GNS. Like, I love the Eonos Yeoman. Yeah, I have a few issues with some of the laziness to which bits are updated, not to mention those dancing soldiers in His Life a Boon. But I love any and all GNS productions, as long as the characters mean what they're saying. To me, that is the important thing. And if that is tradition, in the sense that Gilbert obviously wanted his characters to be authentic with each other, then why can't that be the aim? Why can't we say, well, that is what a true traditional production is? So it doesn't really matter if you have to set it somewhere else or in a different time due to budgetary concerns or due to perhaps the material just becoming slightly problematic over time. As long as the characters' intentions are realised, as long as the characters truly mean what they are saying, and as long as the material is respected and not made fun of. I've seen just so many productions, like more productions than I can count, where the directors just seem to hate GNS. Like, why are you doing it? Like, why are you doing this show if you don't think this material is good? They will try and distract you with doing things in the background. Or they think that, oh, well, no one's going to enjoy a lovely GNS trio, so why don't we just cast one of the most talented GNS performers of the age and just have him walk around a rotating ship? That sounds like a great idea. Directors should trust the material. That doesn't mean you can't find slight flaws in it and correct them, but the material should be trusted. And I feel that most people who want traditional productions of GNS don't necessarily do this, and that is something to be considered. There just seems to be this huge push to make GNS characters as unlikable as possible. And I don't understand this. And perhaps somebody can genuinely help me understand this, because I literally don't. I don't understand why you'd read the text in such a way as to make the characters unlikable. Because any character in GNS, apart from Alexis and maybe Hildebrand, can be a likeable character. And why on earth would you read the text in a way to make these characters awful? What are we gaining from that? I don't get it. Help me out here, guys. What do you think about this? Would you want to go see a traditional production, or would you rather see a production that was trying out something new? What do you think a traditional production is? Let me know in the comments. Please remember to subscribe to the channel. Tell your friends about the channel. Maybe they'll want to subscribe to my channel too. That would be nice. And I will see you for the next video.